Yes, my name is Claire. I'm a BA Archaeology student. I'm just about to start my final year and I'm based at Birkbeck in London. So for me, and I think for many of us, there's something very alluring about the Neolithic and especially their monuments. They've captured human imagination throughout history as places of mystery and magic. But why did the Neolithic people invest so much time and energy into building them? So this presentation is going to discuss the notion that the final form of these monuments, what we see today and what we picture when we think of them, weren't actually specifically what they like the key element of their significance. Instead, I'm going to discuss the idea that it was the act of construction and remodeling that was what made them so important. So this presentation is going to explore the significance of monument building and the constraints and mutability of the different forms of monuments, as well as looking at how monument building may have formed the basis for a collective memory. And I'm going to be using 3 different case studies to look at those points. So just a quick overview of the British Neolithic. If you're not overly familiar with the period, it's from around 4000 BCE to 2400 BCE, followed the Mesolithic, which is mainly a hunter-gatherer society, and preceded the Bronze Age, and was characterized by an increase in settlements, the domestication of plants, animals, new traditions of flint working, and also use of pottery and new traditions in pottery, changes to mortuary and funerary activity, and a mass increase in that. Related to that is monument building, which we'll be looking at today. So a brief overview of some of the main Neolithic monuments. There are many different types. This is not comprehensive, but these are part of the case studies I'm looking at. So we have long barrows, which are early Neolithic, chambered or unchambered, which means they've either got sections built into them or they're just one mass. And they're generally interpreted as collective burial mounds. Causewayed enclosures, again, early Neolithic, and they're a form of earthwork. So they've got banks and ditches creating an enclosed space with designated entrances, which is the causeways for the enclosure. And henge monuments, which are late Neolithic, and again, they're actually a form of earthwork with inner and outer banks, but the other way round to an enclosure. So the ditch is on the inside, like an inverse moat almost. And they can contain extra features like standing stones, which is what we generally think of when we hear the word henge. So the first case study we're going to look at today is Ascott-under-Wychwood Long Barrow. So this long barrow sits within a landscape that's been in use since around 8000 BCE and was revisited over millennia. So that's been evidenced by the presence of Mesolithic microliths, which were very small stone tools. Imagine like arrow barbs, things like that, and they were very common during that period. But visits became much more prolonged and frequent from the beginning of the Neolithic around 4000 BCE. And that's supported by the findings of 2 timber structures, a midden, a pit, and a hearth, which were at the site. However, radiocarbon dating places the initial phase of the long barrow construction to around 3700 BCE, which is minimally 50 years after the last occupation of the site. It's also been argued that when the barrow started being built, there would have been turf covering all these earlier features, with perhaps maybe the midden being identifiable. So given the site's unlikely to have been very visible in the landscape, it's highly plausible that it was known through oral tradition and was intentionally found by a later generation, probably using midden features. So the significance of the midden is supported by the fact that the kists that became part of the long barrow were cut directly into it, creating a clear link between pre-barrow use of the land and the barrow's construction itself. So this implies that the act of the monument's construction was allowing communities to forge a connection to the past and build a sense of continuity within the landscape. So it makes the choice of location a key factor in the monument's significance. So the way the long barrow at Ascott-under-Wychwood was constructed also points to the monument holding a deeper significance than just its form and size. So the builders made the decision to rest the limestone slabs vertically while building the upper part of the divide. This would have made the construction really unstable, so it would have required a communal effort to ensure this part of the structure would hold during construction. So people would have had to physically use their bodies to prop the slabs up, while others collected rubble and midden material to shore up these stones. So this act of intentionally engaging with the build does speak again of a deeper connection to the construction process, but also of one that's shared by the wider community. So the act of collecting items like rubble and stuff to shore up the stones could have been done by physically weaker members of the group, so women, children, the infirm or disabled. So that ensures that all members of the community could participate in the build. So not only does that mean that they were involved and invested in this monument's construction, but it's also a way of teaching and embedding the traditional practice and values over time. Evidence that this need to pass this knowledge on is also supported by a barrow that's only around 20 miles away from Ascott-under-Wychwood, called Hazleton North. And it was built within 2 generations of Ascott-under-Wychwood. So it does suggest there is a shared cultural memory relating to the construction of these monuments. The form is incredibly similar. And again, there's evidence of Mesolithic activity at this site in the form of microliths, and Neolithic activity in the form of post holes, most likely from a structure, along with hearth and again a midden, were all found beneath this long barrow. So once again, the decision was made to actively incorporate earlier phases into the monument. So again, this parallel in site choice and the use of land really supports the idea that the act of building the barrow itself was significant and helped to form that connection to the past that was a defining feature of the construction. So you can argue that the similarities in the building techniques point to a shared cultural ideal, and there is a reverence to form, shape and size that implies that that shape and form was important, which I believe is true. However, I think you can view that as a symbolic connection with the tradition of the build, rather than specifically being connected to the form itself. So both Ascott-under-Wychwood and Hazleton North were constructed over time, undergoing at least 2 separate building phases. So if the shape and size of the final monument was the driving motivation for its construction, it'd be expected the final form would have been completed during the first building phase. So the fact the site's revisited by communities to add to it and alter it strongly implies the structure was malleable and fluid and could be adapted within some boundaries of what was traditional builds. So we can't talk about Neolithic British monuments without having a look at Stonehenge. And this is a further evidence that monuments were mutable constructs. So this world famous proto-henge, but henge monument, started life as a causewayed enclosure, which contained 56 pits, which had a lot of cremations in, which we will mention in a minute. And this causewayed enclosure dates from around 3000 BCE. So the blue stones used in the construction at Stonehenge were actually found to originally have been part of a stone circle from Wales called Warnmorn, excuse the pronunciation. One of the earliest stones, which is one of the earliest stone circles in Britain, dating to around 3600 BCE. So these human cremations that were found at the pits at Stonehenge have been tested with isotope analysis and indicates the people that were buried there were of Welsh origin as well. So there's a very, very strong evidence to suggest that Welsh migrants were actually responsible for the construction of Stonehenge. So that presents a very alternative perspective on the importance of monuments as a symbol of continuity and connection with sort of the ancestral past. Stonehenge contains elements that were intentionally relocated from their original site, and it would have taken a colossal effort to bring these stones to Somerset, demonstrating just how important it was for people to embed their past in this landscape. But interestingly, not all of the cremations at Stonehenge indicate a Welsh origin. And it's been suggested that this act of construction was a way of establishing a new integrated community of locals and migrants working together to embed these stones from Wales within the Somerset landscape. So what I find quite striking is that Warnmorn and Stonehenge's enclosing ditches are of exactly the same diameter, and both of them were aligned gun sight style with the midsummer solstice. So these parallels are such an important indication that Stonehenge was a way for the Welsh community to really take their past and bring it with them and embed it in this landscape. And as mentioned, this decision to build this huge stone circle in Wales, then dismantle it and rebuild it, would have taken an absolutely mammoth effort, which goes far beyond the functional. And in the picture at the base, which doesn't have the standing stones anymore, is Warnmore in Wales, and you can see Stonehenge in the corner, very similar layout. So as with the other monuments discussed here, Stonehenge was also constructed over time, so again conflicting with the idea there was an established final form. And furthermore, is supporting the idea that these monuments were built to evolve is the fact that the trilithon at Stonehenge, which is the structure formed of 2 uprights with the lintel stone, which was key in aligning with solstices, was left untouched during all rebuilding phases. Reconstruction was always done around this structure. So that reinforces the theory that while shape, size, form, and function were all important elements, This communal act of rebuilding and redefining the monuments was vital in establishing and maintaining its significance. That non-functional elements of the structure were reimagined over time does imply that their purpose held a deeper significance. And I believe that that was of reaffirming the community connection with one another and with their shared past and ancestors. So thank you very much for listening. This presentation has looked to explore a range of sites in order to discuss the idea that the practice of building may have been what was significant about Neolithic monuments and not the shape and size constituted in their form. I acknowledge that the form also held a functional aspect, but I would argue that evidence suggests there was a far deeper significance underlying their construction. And the sites discussed do provide persuasive evidence to suggest the building was a way for communities to maintain continuity in the landscape, connect with their ancestors, so they could re-inhabit their past, but reaffirm their bonds between communities and one another. Ethnographic studies of oral traditions support the idea that cultural norms and customs could be passed down over millennia, without written documents, which appears to be the main way that the importance of these monuments of construction was maintained over time, along with involving everyone in the build at the time. So finally, it is the act of building and rebuilding that imbue these monuments with significance. And although monuments may have been built to reflect a common style, I feel this can be viewed as another way communities maintained a shared connection to the past by adhering to a traditional technique and practice, rather than it being the key focus of these monuments constructions. I've popped my email address up if anyone wanted to have a chat with me about what I have discussed today. And these are all my references. If anyone would like to have a read of them, let me know and I can drop you a PDF.